Hey, welcome, Delia, to your conversation with us. We've been really excited to have you come and talk to us about disparities in the COVID-19 impacts on different types of communities and all of that. I know you are in the belly of the beast in New York. And I also know that you are doing your doctoral research on public health education at the Columbia University, and you're actually really working on this area of health disparities and how we address it at a policy level and at different levels in society. So we're really excited to have you here. Welcome to the FLix COVID Conversations.
All right. I thank you so much for this opportunity, and I am just as excited just to be here to really just kind of get the word out and just kind of shine light and just kind of educate people on disparities, because I think a lot of people don't really understand what disparities are, and it doesn't make sense. And hopefully we could educate some people out there.
Educate. Ooh, I love that. I love that. But how's it on the ground for you right now in New York?
Okay, so personally, for me, where I live, my little couple blocks, it's been quiet, and then you hear the sirens, and automatically you know what that means, right? So it's a kind of altered reality I think we're living in, because now all the days are just kind of merging into one, and you're like, what is it, Monday, Friday, whatever, whatever day. And additionally, you get the calls, and then it's like, yeah, another one. So far, my immediate family, we have known personally 6 people who have passed in the Caribbean community.
Oh my God.
So it's
Caribbean.
Yeah.
In New York.
In New York.
What are the ages? What's that looking like?
So they range from 48 to like 70 something, So people who, and what my partner and I, we were discussing that these people weren't ill. They weren't like sick old people, oh my God. They were people who were contributing to the whole Caribbean community. When we would have like our summer gigs in the park, they would be playing their pan. They would contribute to your quality of life as a member of the Caribbean community. So, they're not just numbers. They're real people who led real lives and added, they added so much to other people. So it's a real loss. It's really, really sad. It's really, really sad.
Yeah. So even within the diaspora and the immigrant community in the United States, they are also part of that vulnerable group as well, because of the socioeconomic bracket they fall into when they go there.
Of course, immigrant communities generally are vulnerable communities,
yes.
And from the Caribbean, we're also Black.
Yes.
So that's an additional, and we face all the racial stigma that African Americans face, because they're not going to know, okay, you're not African American, you're Trini or whatever. So we face the same racism.
And that conflict has been going on between, I know there was that rising conflict going on between African Americans and people of the African diaspora from Africa and from the Caribbean, Afro-Caribbeans. There was this mounting thing, but I think when people were talking about COVID being the great leveler, the great equalizer,
yeah.
It does not matter. If you in a society that was built on racial segregation, on class inequality based on racial segregation, it does not matter, what was the origin of your Blackness.
Your geography. We used to think it mattered, our geography. We are from the Caribbean, but hello.
I'm so glad you brought up that topic, because that is something that I just trashed it one time, because I think we, I'm definitely an immigrant, because my Trini accent is super strong, and I'm proud to be a Trini, but African Americans paved the way that I could come and benefit. You understand? They were beaten, dogs, and we know the whole history of the civil rights movement, that I can come back access, you know, that I could be able to attend an Ivy League institution. You know, they paved the way. So they are my ancestors.
Yes.
I will be eternally glad and that they have paved the way. And I think that's the whole kind of mind games that they play with us, that they try to separate. You know, you're not that kind of Black, you're this kind of Black. When we come here, we all have to pay homage to the African Americans who paved the way for us as Black immigrants to come here and do okay. Definitely.
And now is a time for solidarity between these communities in particular, because, you know, there are resiliencies that we can share at this particular point in time, that we need from each other. And not just within our community, but outside our community. There are resiliencies that we have that people who are not African American or not Afro-Caribbean need to avail themselves of. As vulnerable as we might be, there are things that we do better than others as far as dealing with suffering, dealing with adversity, dealing with tough times. This is a time...
And we have the experience.
But that's it. Like, we tired of that experience. Like, we want a different...
Yeah, for sure.
Active.
For sure.
But I do want to ask this. I mean, we've already jumped right into the African American experience and the Afro-Caribbean American experience with what you're doing. But I want to set the tone for this conversation. So we're talking about vulnerable communities. And I wonder if you could help define for us and the viewer, it's not just the African American.
No.
What do we mean by vulnerable communities? What's the context for what we're going to be talking about today?
If we are dealing specifically about health disparities, we're looking at communities whose outcomes are different, solely based on race, socioeconomic standard, where they live, all of these external variables that impact outcomes, leading to something we call health inequities. Yeah. So it's not just Joe A and Jane B, and they come in regardless of where they live and that kind of thing, and they will have the same outcome. Outcomes are impacted by what we also call the social determinants. So the social environment where they live, the socioeconomic standard, all of these things impact the outcomes, and it shouldn't be.
Right. The social, yeah. You wanted to go, Jess? Sorry.
We were talking earlier about the results that came out of St. Louis, where all of the deaths thus far, I don't know if the statistics have changed, but of all the people who have been diagnosed with COVID-19 and went in for treatment, all the deaths of people who are African Americans. And they were looking at these socioeconomic factors that you were talking about, the fact that generations of redlining into certain areas where there's less access to healthcare, there's less access to healthy food. They live in food deserts, so the diet, their dietary needs have not been met, so higher incidence of diabetes and so on, poverty, and so on, because of systemic racial inequalities. Have all contributed to that result in St. Louis. Are you seeing the same thing happening in New York as well?
Well, in New York, it's a little bit different because New York is really unique in terms of how it treats immigrants and African Americans. I mean, it's not the best, but it's the racism is not as blatant as in other parts of the US in terms of access and just insurance and that kind of thing. Just even the fact that in terms of the Affordable Care Act, New York has extended its Medicaid to cover more people. In a lot of other states, that hasn't happened. So you have that whole issue of access. So, but in terms of, because my focus in terms of my work is sexual health. So in New York City high schools, they are mandated basically to provide a basic sexual health curriculum. In a lot of states, I know specifically in Texas, that is not the case. So, you know, you have all these different outcomes based just on the state that you're living in, puts you at risk, basically. Yeah. And I think I just wanted to kind of bring into mind one of the issues with African Americans, because that's basically, like I said, my area of specialty, because I am a researcher in the research group, the fellows of health disparities and health inequities at Columbia University Teachers College. And one of the things, you know, that we focus in is that this is nothing new. Since 1609, when the first slave ship came on the shores of America, we have had racial disparities. And with that, the whole idea of slavery, the fact that your body was used as a tool to make another man's wealth and wealth. You understand? The undermining, the devaluing. That is the premise of America, of devaluing Black bodies and Black labor and that kind of thing. One of the more glaring stories is the so-called father of modern day gynecology. He was known to experiment on slave women. You know, we also have the history of the Tuskegee experiment, where the cure for syphilis,
Yeah, Jesus.
For generations, basically for years, so that men lived their lives with syphilis when they didn't need to. Henrietta Lacks, there's so many instances where African Americans' autonomy, agency, bodies have been devalued by the so-called institutions that are supposed to take care, that are supposed to,
Yeah, I just want to jump in about Henrietta Lacks. I mean, a lot of people may not know about it, and so maybe you could share a little bit about it, because our audience is global.
Right.
I don't know if Anja in
I don't
Slovenia,
know.
right, has never heard of Henrietta Lacks. So it's an important story, and I think you should share a little more on that. Yeah.
Definitely. So if anyone has ever worked in a lab, they use cells, Lacks cells. Those are from Henrietta Lacks. And this is to this day. So Henrietta Lacks was an African-American woman who...
Globally, right? Globally,
all over the world. Yeah, who was diagnosed with cancer at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Maryland, right? So as she was in that hospital, there was another doctor who was doing experiments and trying to kind of figure out what was going on with cancer cells, trying to get them to replicate outside of the body. Every time they did a scrape, as they would say, of the cells, they would put it in the labs and it would all fail except Henrietta Lacks cells. Her cells were the only cells that would replicate, right? And with that, they were able to do numerous experiments, you know, everything based on this.
and create create vaccines and all this kind of thing.
Yeah, she was never told. There was no consent or anything
given, or compensation to her or her family.
Or the family.
In 2020, not a dime.
And pharmaceutical companies have made billions.
Companies
maybe
of
trillions.
Building.
Yeah.
So when people, this is because we're going to get to the
we're going a little off. We're going a little off.
How we reverse these things?
It's not
because
let's hear it again.
You see how what we just did was made the link between that exploitation and massive profit of large multinational corporations today. And we'll get back, so I want us to return to that point later. But when we start talking about equity.
I didn't think I would have been so excited in this conversation. I mean, I was fascinated, but this is a really important conversation, because this Henrietta Lacks, my first instinct was, we're going off a little. But then I remember just a few days ago, this French official or medical doctor or scientist or whatnot saying that they are going to test their vaccine or test something in Africa. Do you remember that?
Of course.
Yes. So it's the same issue.
So this is the mindset.
Black and brown bodies.
Right. Can be used, abused. So we know this. So that creates a mistrust. You understand? when you see that you abuse, you're devalued, how can I now trust you to tell me something? You understand?
Is that why the African Americans are turning to God and to church, and they believe more in what their pastors are telling
healing
them
than medical healing?
What the institutions.
It is a contributing factor to an environment. You understand? Because remember, the social determinants of health. So one of the factors that impact African American health is their belief systems about institutions, i.e. medical institutions. So if I believe that they are going to use my body to experiment to get something, that ain't happening. So I don't care COVID who, that's exactly. So that is one of the factors of the social determinant that is impacting the health outcomes of African American. This history of abuse, misuse, disregard, and devaluing of the African American body, the Black body.
Yeah.
This happens in Africa as well,
And we know that the outcomes as well, because so it's not just the fear of being exploited, but when people of color engage with, and also women, because it said both women and people of color engage with the medical community, they are not heard, they are not listened to. They wait longer to get pain medication. Maternity death rates are higher. And they are not listened to about complaints and conditions. When they report it, it's brushed off, and then it because of that, it develops into something worse when earlier intervention could have stopped it.
I hear a lot of people saying, how can COVID-19 be racist? It's a bug. Like, what are you talking about? That's not true. You're right. COVID-19 is not racist. This little sucker don't care if you're brown, if you're Black, if you're white, rich, poor. It's an equal opportunity killer, okay? But unfortunately, people in Black and brown communities, and especially Black, have outcomes, right, that are different. We are dying more from getting COVID-19. We are ending up in the ICU and the emergency room in higher numbers. So that is what we are talking about. The outcomes of being infected by COVID-19 vary by race, basically.
The virus is neutral, but it's not impacting a neutral and equitable society. That's so the outcomes, of course, are not going to be even.
Exactly. Well said.
Well said. Well said. We've been spending about an hour talking about this, and particularly from the perspective of African American people and people of African descent. Anja, you've been a little quiet. I was wondering how you feel as a European woman in this conversation. Are you feeling? Yeah. What are you feeling?
I feel like, the people of color do have their voice, and I want them to be heard, right?
Well, we want you to be heard too. This is a brave space, and this is what we're about here. Yeah. I'm
actually thinking whether there is any how to actually address the analogies of, we constantly go through different fights. So what happened to me recently is we had a conversation about feminism, which stands basically for fighting for the equality between men and women. And having these conversations, it became very clear to me that not all the cultures are treating their women the same way. So for example, the southern you go in Europe, if you go to Italy, there's a mother figure that is a big figure. Everybody looks upon their moms. If you curse their mom, that's probably the biggest curse that you can use. Same goes for Trinidad, at least that was my experience. Women are treated differently. They're praised. They're being constantly empowered by their men. And that's a completely different approach than here what's happening. And what's happening is that women try to fight for their freedom, fight for their equality. And because the equal position comes with a fight, it's never going to be similar as if somebody actually empowers you and supports you. on your way to that positioning. And I think that this is the analogy that might be very much reflected in a fight that people of color are now having and going through. Instead of being empowered in their equalities, they're just left alone in their fight for being equal in the society. So it's always going to be us against whomever it is on the other side, because we perceive it as a fight. And even when I'm being addressed like, how do you feel? Because we're here fighting. So you either join our fight or, you're on the opposite side by default, because we are talking about the ism, because this is a movement, because this is a fight, this is a huge, it's,
And people are coming at it, like you said, you're coming at it from a different perspective. And the Caribbean is a very matriarchal society in a way. The Afro-Caribbean, they descend from indigenous people that had a strong matriarchal basis. In addition to the experience we had in the Caribbean, ended up with a lot of households being headed by a woman. Because broken families, men were either transient or killed or missing, and the same thing in the United States as well. Yeah. So there is, a certain elevation of women, but within that mother role, where our fight feminism-wise is mostly concentrated, there is a lot of suppression in certain areas of sexual power, financial power as well, of women being able to have that, and of course the sexual relationships with men, and the violence and the possessiveness and the ownership. There's a lot of generational trauma that comes to a head there that informs that. But in the Caribbean, women outnumber men in the universities. We have a fairly well representation of women in parliament, and St. Lucia, for example, was recognized as the third country with the most women in upper management, senior and upper management, and so on. So it's
definitely. So from what what I'm gathering here is that we need those that hold power. We need allyship. Yes, we need them to say, listen, the society works best when equity is the normative practice, and we can, receive and give this power as it needs, because sometimes it needs to be X, need to be Y, but it's okay. It's not X holding on to power.
Power is a complex system in a society in itself.
Right.
It's interesting because when we were speaking about COVID-19 and how there's these differences, and how, for example, people of color are now getting sicker and sicker, even though before there was even a concept that, Black people don't get sick. Like, when I heard that, like,
there was
that rumor. Like, why would that even be the case? I would really need to have a very strong confirmation from a scientist or something.
I hear you. Okay, I will look like a crackpot. So
go ahead. No, this is good.
What I'm now thinking, it's not really just the connection to the color. That might be very early on element that influenced the whole development of how we formed these differences between us. But I now am hearing that there is like a fight between poor and rich. Those in power that actually have all the information and have all the access. And now we're here like being in a corner, the middle class and the poor people, and we don't really know what's happening, and we don't know how to actually, even react to what's happening to us. We're like, oh yeah, the medicine is coming and this is our plan. Like how we are going to tackle COVID-19, we're gonna wait for the rich people to actually come up with a medicine and tell us who gets the medicine and who not.
The vaccine.
Vaccine, yeah. And I'm like, really? That's our plan?
And in homogenous societies like yours, Anja, it is class that is where the vulnerabilities come in. Class.
Does Slovenia have a big class issue?
No, we're very much just equal. We barely even have like the rich class and the middle class. I'd say that the middle class is pretty much what we have. That's a normal. Even if you take a look at the charts from all the states from Europe, we're in the very middle of it. So we're like the best testing area for getting to know what the middle actually wants.
And and Slovenia is not Scandinavia, and I'm not saying that, but a lot of Scandinavian countries have that similar sort of society, a homogenous sort of society. So it's very fascinating.
Equal wealth distribution.
I mean, it tells you
in societies like ours in the Caribbean and in the USA,
and the UK, class is very much linked to outcomes. Ethnicity. Outcomes. Mm-hmm. So class is a factor. So there's an economic factor, and then class is very much linked to ethnic other correlations as well, and that is why the conversation went the way it did. I hear you, but the UK people would tell you that the UK people that I know, and they say no, it's not on race at all, and it is class. And I have to say that there does seem to be, if you are recognized of a particular class, the race issue, the ethnicity issue does not seem to operate similarly. I mean, well, maybe I have a little privileged experience here in my bubble here, but that may not be true. I'm not arguing it. Just
but you need to look at.
Correct, Margaret, because it's never one thing.
Yeah.
It's always multifactorial.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have to remember that. It's always a combination. And the thing about that is why I love this whole concept of the social determinants of health, because it's not standard across the board. Because the social determinants of health in Trinidad and Tobago will be different from the social determinants of health in the UK and the USA, right? So every country's particular social and cultural conditions impact health outcomes in a totally different way.
Yes. Yes, and with COVID, we cannot ignore it. It's glaring now. Things that we were pushing under the rug.
Look at Italy. You know, their social determinants of health is different. So who's impacted? Older people. You understand? It has nothing to do with race or whatever. That is the most vulnerable population there. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yes.
So it's a critical lens to view health.
So it when the outcomes are not good either, when they do engage, that as well, I guess, would lead to that distrust and that disparity too.
Yes. So I really think that this is something as a health educator going forward that, you know, we have to look at mending bridges, you know, because healthcare is amazing. You know what I mean? Yeah, a lot of people who were really, I mean, I know one person who had COVID-19, he was an older person, and he had amazing healthcare. You know what I'm saying? Amazing healthcare. So it is amazing.
Wait,
and
so
just because we have this lack of mistrust, sometimes we don't avail ourselves to it.
So when do we do that flip? Because on one side we are talking about how the institutions are not trustworthy, how they're abusing people, and on the other side we have a trustworthy and very nice healthcare. Where is?
No. I'm saying that healthcare at its highest form, which is to save lives, it's amazing, right?
As an idea.
No.
In the US?
In the US. The US is known for
being able to be sick and access medical care and recover, you know? Or
as an idea.
Yes.
We're trying to understand what you're saying. Are you saying as an idea, as a concept? Or are you saying the US healthcare system is amazing?
I'm not talking about,
amazing.
About healthcare, the whole idea let's say I get into a traumatic accident and I'm rushed to the emergency, and the emergency surgery had saved my life. That is amazing. That whole concept, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
That whole concept.
It's the best of human beings.
I see your passion.
Innovation.
Yes. But because we are so burdened, you understand that even when that we don't avail ourselves to it, sometimes to our own detriment. And of course, the answer lies in what we will call, multicultural competency, right? Where health care providers, doctors, everybody understand that not all your patients come from the same socioeconomic or cultural background, and you have to take that into consideration when you treat them. And just because I'm Black, it doesn't mean that that I can take more pain. You know, that just because I'm
multicultural competency. That is an interesting phrase, because I was even here in the UK. There's a thing about people of color like myself not having enough. You would know more about this, I think, vitamin D or something like that.
That's a very
and a lot of the healthcare practitioners here are not really mindful of the particular
needs. And actually, the lack of vitamin D is considered a health disparity, especially with people of color who live in temperate countries. And vitamin D is critical. It's a critical part of immunity, right? So, and a lot of Black people, people of color in temperate countries, because the way how it is that our bodies, the more melanin we have, it's more difficult to produce vitamin D. You understand?
Yes.
So there we are.
Because we were meant to get it from the sun.
Exactly.
And we're not, and we're living in a place where the sun isn't, as present. So of course.
But back to what Anja was saying about the flip, about, continue to explain, because you're saying that there is an amazing healthcare system on one side, but you're saying there are people who mistrust it, and I think Anja was trying to bring that together.
Right. I'm saying that healthcare, right? The ideal, it's really amazing that, with the technology that we have and the understanding, right? That if we naturally trust it, right? A lot of the underlying so-called comorbidities that we have as Black people could be better managed, right? But if your feeling is that this, I cannot trust that. So that's an additional risk factor. Because
okay, so are you saying that we need to find ways to build trust?
Exactly. That is one of the issues that we have. We don't trust our institutions, be it political, be it medical, economic. There's a lack of trust in institutions.
And I would say, if historically we've seen that there's this multicultural incompetency when dealing with, vulnerable and marginalized communities or people of color, then how do we build trust?
And this is what I was saying about COVID-19. COVID-19 is an opportunity for a reset.
Yes.
A reset. You understand? Where we can realize that, listen, healthcare needs to do better. Our political institutions need to do better. Everyone needs to realize that health equity is a goal that we must strive for. And the thing about it is that everything is interconnected. It can't just be, healthcare. Everything has to come together with this overarching goal that human life is precious. And we all work together for that particular outcome, right?
And you're talking about comorbidities. You're speaking about underlying conditions like hypertension and diabetes, or the likelihood of people of African American descent or having those conditions to start with, which increases their risk of a more severe reaction to COVID.
Outcome, yeah, it does.
Yeah.
The fact is, yeah, we listen, just the stressor of being Black in America impacts your health.
Yes.
You're just having to have these racialized interactions.
Microaggressions.
Seen as a person, but your first thing is you're not seen as a woman. You're seen as a Black woman. And then if you look a particular way, you might be a poor Black woman. So your value decreases based on all of these different categories.
Yes.
And you have
what
to
about
navigate that life?
Things within the community itself that they have adopted as culture. So diet, you know, a lot of the diet was informed by a history of slavery, and the foods that were given. And yes, taken it and make something delicious out of it. But it's not healthy, but it's not culture, you know, and you were talking before about how certain states have different applications of their health regulations and health education. Texas, and we know the reason why that there's that disparity, and it is, again, culture, it's religious as well. So what are some of the cultural things within certain vulnerable communities we need to look at that, you know, it's within the community now, it's not people outside treating, but it's within the community that we need to look at too?
Definitely, some of the normative things that we practice don't really benefit our health. You know, we are more likely to eat foods that are high in carbs, and you know, there's a direct correlation to a high carb diet, you understand, and diabetes, and you know, kidney failure, and all of these different things. But definitely, our normative diet practices contribute to these poor health outcomes, you know. So this is where, again, education needs to come in and say, listen, we can take the spirit of what, you know, is the norm, the practice, but we could change it around a little bit, and you know, and all of this contributes to an understanding that, listen, it's not 1816 anymore. It's 2020. We know better. You understand? Let's all work together. Because not everything is external, as you said. It is the normative cultural practices within the group that also creates health risks.
And I like that. Let us come together, because again, with the Caribbean, we might have things that might help that out. So you have the ITAL diet that the Rastafarians have, you know, more fruits and vegetables. And if you're going to use carbs, use complex carbs from like cassava and yam and sweet potato and that type of thing. That is where we could, you know, enrich each other and build resiliencies within our community too.
Definitely, that is a factor, and that needs to be addressed in terms of, you know, changing health outcomes.
I don't see how we get there without addressing things that are inaccurate. You can't address health without being correct. The information has to be correct. And if there are
5G.
forces, if there are things, whether it's conspiracy theories, whether it is religious things saying, oh no, it is just end times thing, it isn't, you know, it's some devil thing, it's not, you know.
But let's get Delia's take on 5G now. Sorry.
I want to hear Delia's take on 5G, please. So
I know there's a real serious thing going on, Delia. There are people with serious concerns. We were in a meeting, the three of us were in a meeting, was it yesterday?
Yesterday,
where somebody was raising this in a serious way and saying, we have to, and we were like, And
Chronics, you know, the dancehall artist, Chronics, he posted up something on that. So we tend to, because we have this distrust, you know, we tend to be more susceptible to believing a lot of these conspiracy things.
And I think you basically, you know, answer the question, right? Because I think especially as Black people, we have always understood in this modern iteration that the world is somewhat unfair to us, you know? So we've always seen things in our communities that we don't see in other communities. And we know that it's not right. So we've always had to find a way to say, okay, maybe this is why this is not right. You understand? And a lot of times those things might have one iota of truth and 99% of fairy tale, but we had to make sense of a world that treated us less. You understand? So we, I think, as Black people, are more prone to conspiracy theories. But as far as 5G is concerned,
I don't think we are flat earthers, though.
No, I've met a few. I have met a few.
Yeah, but I think the flat earth thing, Anja, I think the flat earth, they have a lot of Caucasians with this flat earth thing.
So, listen, my partner is a flat earther, and I'm like, you need to go to the end. Okay, go to the end of this flat earth.
Wait, your partner is a flat earther?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
This is my life.
I want to jump in.
My communities are coming from space lawyers dealing with space science, so
They're not flat earthers.
I think we have more than enough evidence out there. People are now actually having laws passed for, obtaining the rocks from the moon. I'm pretty sure those things are not flat at all. But yeah, I think we have more important questions to address than whether Earth is flat.
Sorry. We're trying to keep it light too.
Where does that come from? Like, do we lack imagination, or because I'm all for spaghetti monster religion. I'm all for that. I'm all for having.
Yeah, there is one now, spaghetti monster.
Yeah. I'm all for having all the types of religions. I mean, why not, right? It's a belief system. It comes from somewhere. So, I mean, I'm actually curious. What is the baseline for the flat Earth belief?
You asking me?
No, I'm asking Delia.
Delia.
Let me hear Delia.
Really, don't come to me with that. There's no way there, no.
Don't come to you with the flat Earth.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Don't insult my intelligence. Like, come on. But honestly, seriously, getting back to 5G, I personally have not seen any evidence to support the 5G theory.
Right.
And I think it's early yet, and I think we need to do, I need to see some peer-reviewed journal articles really kind of really going into seeing what is the real dangers, because if people are really concerned, then that means it needs to be investigated. It really needs to be investigated. That's my take on it.
Are you observing any suppression of people who want to investigate it by any of the respected research institutions, any kind of reluctance or suppression by corporate or pressure by corporate entities to not do it?
But I mean, I'm not really into tech and engineering and that kind of thing, so I'm not like those, blurbs.
Yeah, we're going off.
We're going off. Yeah, 5G was a kind of diversion.
I know, my diversion.
I'm going back, because Delia, personally.
Guys, listen to me. You guys, 5G is critical to the argument of COVID-19. If not the man of God, the politician, the doctor, where can I get truth? COVID-19 is exposing the
epistemological.
Yeah, and so I mean, you made some really very, very compelling points, Delia, and I mean, it's always fascinating to talk to you and get your views, in particular in this area. I want us to go right back into COVID-19 in this way. You said that COVID-19 is an opportunity to reset. COVID-19 is an opportunity for us to come together around the ultimate goal of health equity. I want to ask you, as an expert working in the field, what would you say are the things that are already existing in our system that we need to keep doing? The things that we definitely need to stop doing, like yesterday, and maybe your ideas as to things that we need to start doing better. I know it's a three-part kind of question, but take your time. What do we need to keep doing in our healthcare system? What's good? What's working?
Research. Research is amazing in terms of actual microbiology and disease and cancers and all of those things are amazing, right? The human education, actually the health education of the health educator. We need to focus on that.
And it's good right now?
No. That is something that needs to
We need to start,
bias.
right.
Yeah.
What bias training, is that what they call it?
Yeah. Not even bias, because like I said, it's not even mandatory according to the Institute of Medicine. It's not even mandatory that doctors do some kind of multicultural competence. It's not mandatory.
Multicultural competency.
Right, it's not mandatory. And unless we get to the point, right, where people who work the system see people who come to utilize the system as equals, as human beings, we will always have health disparities, right? Something that we also need to work on is our education system, especially in minority communities. As a former public school teacher, I have seen the disparity. It is so glaring. Because where I was at, I think there were only maybe 3 or 4 certified teachers. These are teachers who have been there for over 5 years, right? And you know, teaching is something that the more you do it, the better you get. Most of them were teachers who were just trainee teachers, 1-2 year, first year teachers. And you put them in communities of color where there's a certain understanding that needs to be had. So of course we have these poor education outcomes. And if I'm not educated, it's hard for me to understand sometimes information. And I think that could be also a factor. You know, when we have generations that are poorly educated and we send out information, and we're assuming that they get what we're saying, right?
Yeah.
So, education will also help build trust, which is one of the things we've identified here.
Yes.
You know, so
yes, being able to know how to determine whether or not something is true, because you know you have the competency to know, to research for yourself and to understand things. It gives you more confidence to be able to judge whether an institution can be trusted or not.
Exactly. And then just to be able to advocate for your own self. Like if you say, Doc, I have a pain. Oh, it's nothing. No, I really have a pain. And if you're not taking me seriously, I need to speak to someone who will take me seriously, because this is how I feel. Just to give people the ability to voice, you understand? That will make a difference in health outcomes. Simple, you know? And if you're, you know, if you're you know, I don't want to say uneducated, but if you, then your reaction be like, F y'all, blah, 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 blah. Then security comes you out, you understand? You're left with a paper, go home, and then 2 days later you die, and you make the papers, and you're like, oh my God. And then it was like, oh, I remember her, she was so, you understand?
She was a thug,
So as opposed to, you know, one, being able to really explain and say, this is what I want, and 2, the health specialist on the other hand, understanding, you understand, that this person is legitimate, this person. Because, you know, one of the most glaring statistics, right, and we always bring it up in our research group, is the fact that an African-American woman who is educated bachelor's level is more likely to die in childbirth than a white woman with high school education.
Wow.
You know?
But there are a whole set of complex factors that it's not just a direct. I'm sure there are lots of other variables as well.
Of course.
So you're saying that even with the ability to articulate your needs and to speak to a doctor, professional as an equal, still you
have
know,
poorer health outcomes.
I cannot help myself but getting a feeling that we're being very reductionist here. Like just simply stating that, you know, because a person is Black, this is what awaits him. We're not really diving into what is wrong with the whole system. Yes, that's on the surface, that's what it looks like. That's exactly what it actually correlates to. If a person is of that color, this is what the consequences are going to be in practical world. But I do believe that there's like a deeper thing that we would need to tackle. It's not just that we need to educate people that with a different color, with different genetics, with different type of the body, there needs to be a different diet, for example, or there's lack of vitamin D, or that we need to understand how that body functions. It's actually the system itself. Like, we're always going to have migrants. It's not only going to be people of color, it might actually be a new diversity element to it. But
the aliens you talk about from space.
Not necessarily talking about the aliens here, but I have a feeling that
I get your point, Anja, because there's always a group that will, you know, is a vulnerable population. So because I specifically deal with African Americans, I am talking about that, but a lot of these vulnerabilities apply to Native Americans.
Oh, yes.
Definitely new immigrants who don't speak the language, right? So it's basically anyone who doesn't have power.
That's a very good way to.
Oh my gosh.
Anyone who does not have power. And several things have been, power is attached to several things in society. Money.
Yeah.
Money, connections, and like you said, education.
And we can't avoid it. Race and ethnicity.
Yeah, in societies built on apartheid, on some form of a caste system around the amount of melanin in your skin. It is part of it.
Yeah, you know. Yeah. And if you're in a society where that is pretty homogeneous, then it will be, okay, what cultural group you belong to. You know?
Or religion. It might be a religious minority.
Right.
More so than
it's always a way to define by access to power and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I totally get your point, Anja. I totally get your point. But because I live in the US and it was built on you know.
That element is definitely very obvious. I mean, it's interesting because yesterday, when we got a message from our advisories, it was about how the whole society functions from the local and then the medium and then the global factor. And there was the notion, the author of the article actually explicitly stated that the innovation usually happens much faster on a local ground, within local communities, because they're much better connected. They actually think and look after each other and care about each other's interests so much that the innovation actually takes place much faster. What I'm now thinking about is that on a global scale, we are definitely dealing with the racism. We are definitely creating our system around these castes, right? We are having cliques and it still benefits those in power. And they are no doubt taking the advantage of all of us that are be it either middle class or in the poor sector, right? And this is like an ongoing basis. It really needs a reset like COVID, and it really needs like a revolution of a sort. But also what's happening, and I'm actually curious what your opinion on it is there any movements or incentives to kind of invest into the local communities and the innovations that would come from bottom up? Let's not really wait and rely on the political systems and on the institutions. Is there anything happening? Like, do you see that happening within local communities?
Right, but this is the thing about COVID-19, right?
Mm-hmm.
It kind of limits the normative ways that we do things, because we would see if it was any other thing besides this invisible enemy coming at us, right? We would go out there, would mobilize and that kind of thing. But the fact of doing that is putting us at risk for death. right? So we have to like pull back and say, so how do we reach our communities? So actually, mean, there are, I must say, P. Diddy, I don't know if you know of him. Margaret, I think I sent you the link, where he was able to organize a town hall, basically a Zoom, with experts from different areas, basically talking that, basically stating that what we're seeing here, that COVID-19 is having, impacting Black and brown communities much worse than other communities. And what can we do about it? And in terms of the future economic fallout, and how do we deal with it? So because of COVID-19, it's difficult to do what we normally would do to address the situation. So it calls for innovation. It calls for us to think outside the box. Like, how do I get this message out? Because I personally feel one of the issues that we've had with COVID-19 is a lack of proper communication with vulnerable groups, right? Because everything, or if you have comorbidities, what the hell is comorbidity? What is that?
Yeah.
What is that? What is that?
That is a huge contention of mine too, Delia.
If you have diabetes, if you have high blood pressure, you are at risk. You understand? These are the things. I felt the message was very clinical, academic.
Technical language.
Yeah, the first time I heard the word comorbidities was out of your mouth when you were talking to me about it, Delia.
Yeah. So I felt that was a real error in terms of how the message of who is at risk for COVID-19 was put out. And it's this whole myth of it's only older people. People have died from 0 to 100. When a pair of lungs, you're at risk for COVID-19.
There was also something else that happened, and I remember early on thinking, I didn't voice it, in open spaces, but I will share it now. I was like, maybe highly melanated people are not getting it as much as we come, only because of the slow uptake of the disease and the stats that we're seeing on the African continent. You in this field, what are your thoughts about the slow uptake of this in the African continent? Is it just not enough testing? But we're not seeing the deaths either. So what is it happening across there, you think, based on what you may have read so far?
Okay, so this is just my opinion. What I mean?
Yeah.
I personally think it may be previous health status. Like even in Trinidad, you know what I mean?
And Tobago. Let's be politically correct.
Yeah. I feel and diabetes and hypertension is kind of whack in Trinidad now.
Yeah, very high.
Very high. And in St. Lucia as well too.
But in terms of, I feel like, we have all these natural things for upper respiratory stuff. You understand that we tend to probably eat more fruits, even though we might be diabetic and have hypertension or with that. You know what I mean? We have maybe a little.
Also, I was reading that, the average age across the African continent is 18.
Yes,
it's a younger population. Could that be?
That could be a factor, because listen, Black people can get it, and that was
now we know.
That was
and they die, have a high.
Yes.
I just was raising it because I actually think that played into, because it wasn't only me, and I would be with other people of color, and I would hear them saying, we can't get this. I went to Trinidad in early, in March, early to mid-March for about 8 to 10 days, and there was a lot of that being said among people of color. We can't get that.
But that was the whole thing that I was saying about influencers, because most of those things are memes. So it creates a narrative, and this is what, going forward, we need to be careful about the narratives that come across on social media. Because a lot of people really felt that way. I mean, I okay, you know what I mean? I've seen it, But, you know, just wait and see. Let's see what's happening. Let's wait and see what's happening. And now we know that is not true.
I was low-key hoping it was true. I'll be very, very honest. I
break.
was low-key. Yeah, we needed a break.
Because every single disease, whether it's Ebola, you know, even HIV, it's always, you know, the global south and Africa and whatnot, just getting
maybe it's always marginalized. Maybe it's always these vulnerable populations, whatever color they are, and it just so happened that Black and brown people tend to be the most marginalized populations or vulnerable populations.
Let me tell you, in is what country? There's like HIV in certain parts of Russia, the old Russia. The rates are very high. We actually have researchers who go there and do research, but it's never really talked about. Every time we think about AIDS, you think about AIDS in Africa. AIDS is a global disease, understand? But the face of it, ultimately becomes that of Black. There's AIDS in India.
And,
you know what I mean?
And also the LGBT community.
LGBT community too, we spoke about things that we need to keep doing, which we said influencers need to hook up with the people with the accurate information and use their power of influence to educate the people within the marginalized communities who hold them up.
They need to stop spreading misinformation.
I don't know if we could stop that and remember what we said at this point in time.
Responsibility. The influencers need to be more responsible. That's what
Delia is saying. There needs to be a code of ethics for influencers. You can't just post shit like major hype. Yeah, I was like,
but how would we define an influencer? We do it quantitatively by the number of.
You have 1,000 or more followers. Because if you could influence 1,000 people, those 1,000 people can, you need to have
exponential growth, which we all know about since COVID-19.
Yes.
But then, even if you have 10 followers, you should have that responsibility. Ooh, we get into.
I think everyone should. Everyone should.
Yeah.
But going about regulating what people say has to be done carefully, because you are seen to be censoring, you become part of the conspiracy, you know, to suppress information and whatnot. And so it has to be a kind of soft inroads approach. In other words, you, instead of trying to suppress, you provide an alternative that's better.
Information that, you know, you guys should really, because people are dying, and how can we help our community? Like a community-based kind of approach. But definitely, listen, I have been trying to do my thing, going on Instagram and like going and people post.
Yes.
Listen, guys, let's deal with the facts, blah, blah, blah. And I try to put stats, and people come at me like, rah!
My goodness. It's a serious situation.
Serious thing.
People are literally dying. You like,
you're working for the system.
And I'm a house nigga. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. No, explicitly, Uncle Tom, you're part of the Illuminati. You know.
And you know,
but on that note, because you before you were talking about the creation of a new world out of this. So we were talking about reactions to this.
Use my words.
Yes. I tried to.
That has some problematic connotations from a global
connotations. That new world order has some. But we were talking about
Christians, all the Christians. No, the blood of Jesus.
Infiltrator.
You know how our system is complex, right? And it's quite difficult to see where it breaks apart, unless we go through an unforeseen situation that really shows us what doesn't function well. And right now, for example, yesterday I was having a conversation with a guy from Bali, and he was telling me about how the whole country is being very affected and at risk because 90% of all the economy actually comes from tourism. And I thought immediately like, okay, yeah, well, that's what happens when you put all the eggs in the same basket. As soon as you put everything in the same basket, you either need to have very good insurance policy, like a plan B. So for when the unforeseen happens, then you have some reimbursement, or you have something that is going to be, compensating the losses that you make, or you have a very good distribution of everything that you risk. So you don't risk every, like 90% of your population whenever this happens, whenever tourism is no longer your one point of profit. And I think
That's
that what is happening right now is that we are seeing through the system, and the crisis that is happening is showing us how fragile our society is, and who are those cliques or classes of our society that are the most exposed ones, for whom the system is not really taking care of. And if that's the case, that, for example, the people of color are now getting more and more sick, that means that they are not getting enough information. They're not getting enough valuable information, that all the prevention mechanisms and the health system is not reaching them. But the problem is not the COVID. Problem is, why are those mechanisms not reaching them? What's the obstacle here? Like, it's not that there's too many of them. It's probably not really having anything to do with the money, because you can't buy the medicine just yet. It actually has to do something with the information distribution. Or maybe the masks distribution, I don't know, but those are the fragility points of our system.
And additionally, I think there isn't any system that COVID-19 is not exposing. Especially in the US, it's exposing our political system. It's exposing our economic thinking, how it's very flawed. It's the fact that you think that printing $2 trillion and maybe an next trillion, you know, I mean, $1 trillion is like, what, 1,000 billion? You know what I mean? And it's like fiat money because there's nothing to back it. Like, what are the unintended consequences, right? Of course, in the healthcare system, basically collapsed in New York for a couple of weeks. It was like no one was going to the hospital, right? So every system that we have carefully, you know, managed and maneuvered and whatever, COVID-19 has shown us that this shit doesn't work. It is not working. You understand? And maybe they are working, but you know. Yes.
Margaret was and I were talking about it as well. It came out of a previous conversation with Chris Eukins on procurement. Is it true that New York is being denied supplies, the masks and the respirators and stuff that are in stockpile, federal stockpile, and Trump is holding it withholding it?
Political games, right? He's playing political games, and the states that are doing his bidding, of course, they're going to get it. And it's you know what I mean? And it's also another thing that this has highlighted is the fact that the US produces nothing. So we are basically held hostage by China to deliver the PPE that our healthcare workers need. We produce nothing. So everything is, you know, and then you're looking at, like I saw, Wall Street had its best day since 1938. 6 more million people filed for unemployment. So you are seeing, it's a sham. Our systems have failed, and COVID-19 is illuminating the failure of every single system, because you can't have Wall Street doing the best day since 1938 and 6 million people filing for unemployment. You understand? It's a kind of altered reality. There's Wall Street, and then there's Main Street, right? And these are the things that since the Occupy Wall Street movement that they have been trying to highlight. The system is not working. The system is not working. And we the public, are constantly led and fooled to believe, no matter what, we have to maintain the banks, maintain Boeing, maintain these because they're drivers of the economy and this and that and whatever. You understand? But now, you know, COVID-19 is showing that we don't know what's going to go on. We don't know what the future holds. I mean, Margaret, I know that's your area of expertise. It's not really my area. But what do you
we've had many conversations about it. We have.
Yeah, what do you think is the economic fallout going to be of COVID-19?
Oh my God, that is a very difficult question for me to answer. Yeah, very difficult to answer, but of course it's going to have massive impacts. We know we're going to have inflationary impacts. Look at the loss of jobs. Some jobs will never ever be restored, because we will no longer be doing things in the same way again. And there, I mean, that's, yeah. A lot of businesses are now recognizing that, people can work from home. And so therefore, and they need, so it's going to be a lot. I mean, it's a huge issue, these governments printing money. And you mentioned that point, and that is a point that we all have to look at. There are going to be huge impacts about this massive influx of money into our economic system. But yeah, that's another conversation. One of the things I want to say to you is, this conversation has really lifted my spirits, even though we were talking about a very, very serious issue. The disparities and COVID-19 impacts, because I talk to you and we have spoken to you, and I feel reassured that there are experts in different specializations working to seize the opportunity that COVID-19 presents, and COVID-19, we join with you in this show, in FLix. This is why we're doing this show and speaking to experts like yourself. This is the exact reason why, because COVID-19 presents an unprecedented opportunity for change and for a transition to a more just, a more fair, and ecologically resilient society. So I just want to thank you so much for the richness of this interview, and the way you were able to be so intersectional in your delivery, tying in all of these, issues. It was really awesome, Delia. We'd love to have more conversations with you going forward. I don't know if there are any last words. I mean, you dropped so many pearls of wisdom. If you want to speak directly to the population that you are serving and you are researching and you are trying to create an impact in, the African-American population, whether it's in New York or across the US, if you have a message that you just want to shout out to them,
Stay your ass inside. Point of bad manners, because that is actually flattening the curve.
Yeah, no, but we've been talking about the reactions, right? So let's talk about the proactive thing now, the world building that we see in the future coming out of this. So getting to that equitable place on a systemic level, which is a huge challenge, but putting us up to that discussion to end this with. We were talking about how research and experimentation on brown and black bodies have helped to build the pharmaceutical companies up to where they are now. Not just the pharmaceutical companies, but several Fortune 500 companies. Their fortunes are directly linked to slavery, to that type of, and colonialism and neocolonialism and the exploitation of black and brown people. When we are talking about systemic change, what is the role of these corporations in getting us to that equitable place?
Well, the thing about it is that one of the fallouts of COVID-19 is that the economic future is questionable. We cannot assume that if they say, okay, open back the place, that everything goes back to normal, right? So we may be seeing companies fall. We may be seeing a shift in who the companies are, the economic, who keeps the economic power, right? So that shift, I think, ultimately is happening. But what we have to do on the ground, I think, on a human level, because I think one of the things that COVID-19 has taught us is that the things that we thought we couldn't do it out, we sure hell can, right? We don't need to shop every weekend. We don't need a new outfit every weekend. We don't need to be, you know what I mean? It's just like a evaluating of what is important. You understand? And we can decide how we want the world to look like. right? And we have to figure out that, because each person's idea of that is a little bit different. So it's a kind of personal kind of thing, like, okay, COVID-19, we realize that what I do, because that's the thing about COVID-19, right? It wasn't this, just what I do, if like HIV kind of thing. If I have sex with this person, then I could get it. No, if I just live my life, I could get it. But the people I love, my auntie, my grandma, whatever, can get it. So my actions matter. How do we take that to the next level? What I buy matter, you know what I mean? In terms of how people live. Like, those are the questions that we now have to get people to think about, right? And we have to put people in power that share those values and those ideals. That the world that we had post 2020, we don't want it. We want a world of equity, transparency, where everyone can be, you understand, connect to their divine and become and do whatever they want to do in a way that doesn't harm another person. You know?
Yes.
Beautiful.
Yes, Delia. That is a wonderful place to end it. That it's not a corporate power that we need to look to. It is
the power within.
Yes.
Love it. Thank you so much, Delia, for this conversation.
Pleasure. You guys are amazing, and thank you for inviting me.
I enjoyed this so much. Thank you, Delia.